All right, guys, we are live on Facebook. Everything looks good. I'm going to go ahead and get us on the tripod right here, and we'll get ready to get started any minute.
Hey, audience. Hello from Eagle Point Fishing Camp, San Leon, Texas.
Okay, looks good. I'm going to get a little closer to you. Normally I'm sitting next to Eric. Today I'm not sitting next to Eric.
I got lucky today. That's a good thing.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Galveston Bay Fishing Show. I'm Rebecca.
I'm David.
I'm Eric. John Valentino.
All right, so today we're going to talk about, where's my article? An article that came out this weekend in the Houston Chronicle. If you didn't see it, you're going to hear about it today because we're going to be talking about it. The article is about the Upper Coast trout limit. And a survey went out to the Texas Parks and Wildlife. And from this survey, they had some really interesting results. And we read this article and we wanted to share it with you because we think it's important that our customers and our friends know about what's happening if they haven't been able to read this article. So what the main point of the article is, guys, is that they are now trying to take our 10 trout limit per day and make it a 5 trout limit. And the survey they did is very interesting. We're going to get into that. But we want to start talking about the trout regulations. And we're going to start with what the regulations have been through the years. And David, you're going to start with that.
Sure. In 1978, trout was 12-inch minimum, 20 trout per person per day, 40 in possession. And then in 1984, they dropped the trout limit to 10, 14-inch minimum with a 10-fish limit and 20 in possession. And then in 1989, they went to 15-inch minimum on the size and kept the bag limits the same.
1990.
1990, actually. And then in 2003, a 25-inch rule was implemented that you could catch one trout over 25 inches per person on a day. And then the other trout over 25 inches you had to release.
So real quick, guys, I just want to know why in the past has the Texas Park and Wildlife put these limits on our fishing when it comes to trout?
Supposedly to enhance the fishery. To make it the population of fish grow and to let the anglers catch more fish.
And that is what they're saying in this article as well. They're saying that the Texas Park and Wildlife, overall, the general idea is that they think this is going to help the trout population. And I just want to kind of get your thoughts, Johnny. What do you think?
There's definitely an attempt on their part to manage fishermen, because I think when you ask the department what they're capable of doing, they basically respond with one statement, and that is they can't control the fishery itself from their viewpoint, but they can control fishermen. So in an effort to enhance fishing, enhance the fishing experience, then they've instituted these regulations. And of course, I think many of us who were in the industry back in the 70s and 80s probably didn't wince too much when our limit was dropped from as many as you wanted to 20. Because most of us felt, well, certainly 20 is more fish than an angler would need. We did flinch a little bit when it was dropped to 10. And then we, of course, have watched the attempt to drop it to 5, and we feel that is excessive and probably counterproductive to what we really want to see in the fishing industry. So that's kind of the whole list of items from the standpoint of an angler and also an individual who runs a fishing business.
Well, and to answer your question too, every time that they've done a change, 78, 84, 90, 2003, it's been sold. It's a bill of goods that's sold to the public that this is going to not only stabilize, but somehow improve trout catching. So it's not, we're going to change the trout regulations and things are just going to continue to get worse, but just slowly. or they're going to stabilize. This is going to stabilize trout, and it's going to get better.
And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, we've never seen statistics that stand out in my eyes and that have been published, i.e. on Galveston Bay or Matagorda or what we call the lower coast, that would substantiate beyond a shadow of a doubt that there is some gigantic increase in trout numbers based on limits put on people with a rod and reel.
Yeah,
That's
I mean,
what
that's, look, with
Now,
all these limits,
that's key though.
that
Rod
is
and reel.
key.
Rod and reel.
Rod and reel. But with all the limits that they implemented from 78 to 84 to 89 to 2003, if it enhances the fishing and the abundance of fish, why are we talking about it now again? Apparently, it didn't work in 78, 84, 89, and 2003.
Or they just want to pass more laws, or they just want to pass more regulation, just to pass it. If it's working like they say it should, I should be able to walk out there and pick up a trout with my hand.
And we all know that's not going to happen. You catch a lot of fish, but that's not what's going to happen. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about this survey because the survey was mailed out to 2,342 anglers and 358 guides. That is 2,700 people that it was mailed out to. Of that number, only 23% responded. 630 people out of 2,700 people actually responded to this survey. And just a side note with mailing something these days, half the time I receive something like this in the mail, it just goes in the recycling bin anyway. I mean, it just seems like it's too much work for me to respond to something by mail versus email and the internet, which seems so much simpler, especially with the way people think and act and are always looking for the fast response today. But Johnny, I wanted you to talk a little bit about why we think only 630 people responded to this survey.
You know, when you research surveys, not only the reliability of those, just like polling, and all of that becomes very, very confusing. But what I think that stands out is that there's some fairly common sense ideas that people have in regard to surveys, because everybody receives those surveys, and who basically is going to sit down and fill a survey out. And so there are reasons why people always do that, and it doesn't take a lot of study to figure that out. And one of those reasons that is most prominent is that there has to be some reason, some reward for you to fill out a survey, and that's why many surveys come and there's actually a cash reward for filling them out, or some benefit to you.
Free car wash.
Correct.
I like the $5 Visa card.
Sure. In this particular case, the state's not sending any monetary reward or anything else, so there has to be a reward for you filling out a survey, and I think it's fairly apparent that in the response, there's a percentage of respondents that sticks out and is fairly glaring, and I believe that my notes reflected that of the respondents, 18.7% approximately were from non-guides, or just your average fishermen, but 42.7% was the response rate for the fishing guides. And this is a glaring skewing of a survey result. Once you have something like that, then what it shows is that there's an interest group that responded to this survey way higher than the regular fishermen, and that's a problem for me.
You know, and one of the things when we were looking at the survey, we actually decided to do research on why most people respond to surveys. And we did find an article that was pretty interesting about why people actually do respond to surveys. And Johnny, what was the percentage of people and the reason they respond most often?
Well, the reason they respond most often is that there's basically what I mentioned before. It's called reciprocity, and there's some reward that you're going to get. In this particular case, as we mentioned, it's not money or anything, but I think a lot of the guides who responded to this particular survey had the idea that they're going to get a regulation that's more favorable to their particular job as a professional fishing guide. And I don't mean this in a negative way or to be accusatory, because anyone in business is going to take that approach. But what it does do is it skews this survey out of the realm of representing the Texas angler, the average Texas angler. It becomes a survey in which it's skewed so far to professional fishing guides that it loses all credibility.
Okay. The average age of the respondent for this survey, guys, was 54. And that number did speak to us for a couple of reasons. Eric, you want to get into that?
Well, 54 is a high number. I think in one of the surveys that my dad looked at from 1989, the average angler at the time in 1989 was between 30 and 39 years old.
Correct.
So, is that called a median?
Correct.
Yeah.
So the median age was 30 to 39. In the response to this survey, it was interesting that the average age was 54. That didn't surprise David and I. At Eagle Point, and from talking with other people in the boating and marina business, boat salespeople that I know that sell boats. I used to sell boats in the late 90s. I still have people that are in the industry. My dad and I have probably, what is that, about 70 magazines over there from the boating industry. And these magazines are all covering this subject. How do you get people in their 20s and 30s and 40s into boating, and how do you get them to use the boat? And they are having a very tough time doing that. So David and I have been talking about this message that's being spread by some people that the Bay is just packed with people. The Galveston Bay, there's 1 million residential license holders, recreational fishing license holders, which means that number means then that the Bay is just packed with people. We don't see them. There's people fishing, but there's not people fishing like there was in 1960, like 1970, like 1980, like 1990. Boats have gone up so much in price. Of course, you have fuel-related costs. You have boat storage costs, which here at Eagle Point, we have boat storage. Our cost has gone up dramatically. Everything's gone up. And so that number, 54, that's interesting. That's a little scary. And
I mean, that tells me, right? That number tells me that sport fishing, which you could call sport fishing, trout fishing, bay fishing, that number is the people aren't doing it anymore. The new people are not coming into fishing. Fishing is not a way for them to get their entertainment on weekends.
And you have to ask the question of why is it dropping down? And I don't think this is a flag that the Texas Parks and Wildlife has picked up. In other words,
why not?
Because, well, the state of the population of Texas, has increased enormously. So if you really look at a percentage of people in Texas that owned fishing license in 1970, percentage-wise, and the percentage that owns fishing license today, then you will see a dramatic drop. We have so many more people living here that an increase in licenses actually is what the numbers we're looking at is a decrease in licenses. And this is not just
due to
Texas.
population.
Yes. You have a lower and lower percentage of people who even buy license. And of course, what we maintain for decades is that the change in regulations is having a huge impact. You have regulations on drum, you have regulations on sheepset, and all the bottom fish, with the exception of croaker and sand trout. But the fishermen who used to fish for those fish no longer do so.
Yeah.
They've dropped out of fishing. Parks and Wildlife has ignored this. And now they're using...
but why are they ignoring it? I think it's because they still got their 1 million, roughly 1 million recreational license holder,
Sure.
which 1 million recreational fishing license holders, that puts $35 million, an estimated $35 million in their pockets. So they've got the money. They're getting the money.
Well, I'll touch on a minor little point. Back when I started in this business, if you fished in your own county, you didn't need a fishing license. If you were on your own pier, you didn't need a license. Or if you were
On your own pier.
yeah, if you were crabbing, you didn't need a license for that. If you were a senior citizen, you were exempted. So sometimes when we look at these numbers, they're not exactly accurate. We've added all our seniors to the rolls, and now that is a growing number, as we well know, because now I'm able to buy an exempt license. How do you like that? I buy my exempt license, and so we've added to the rolls.
And now, as David pointed
The
out,
super combo.
people in the 60s, 70s, 80s, a lot of people that we would just come across, they would say, man, I'm glad I didn't get caught. I've been fishing all year long with no license.
Right.
People don't do that today.
No.
Right.
But
So
the
I think-
super combos increase the number of licenses sold. I mean, I was talking to Eric, and I'm like, hey, look, if you walk in and you're going to go hunting too, and you have to buy all the stamps, you might as well buy the super combo, because in the long run, it's cheaper. It's like you walk into McDonald's, you get a Big Mac and a Coke. Well, that costs $5.25 or whatever it is. But if you get the super combo, that's $4.75. Well, I'll take the dang super
Give me a
combo.
fishing
Give
license.
me the fries.
Give me a saltwater fishing
Yeah,
license.
there
Correct.
you go.
So back to what we were talking about. What's interesting about 54? We could talk about it a very long time. For some reason, in that article, it's talking about fishing pressure, and that's part of the pitch. That's part of the dog and pony show. There's pressure.
Talk about what you mean by that.
Well, people go out fishing, and because they heard that there's fish being caught, let's say, for example, on Hannah's Reef in East Bay. Nowadays, the people that have these boats, these basically 18-foot and larger boats with anywhere up to 300 horsepower, can get from Clear Lake. Let's say they have their boat in rack storage over in Clear Lake. They can come out of the Kemah Cut and be at Hannah's Reef in how long?
30 minutes.
30 minutes, faster than that.
That depends on how fast you run.
300
It'd take
horsepower.
Well, it'll still take me 30
But in any event, people can go where they heard there's fish being caught, and they can get there very quickly. Time spent traveling in a boat, the size of the fuel tank in the boat, the length of the boat, none of that matters anymore. People can go from point A to point B anytime they want, and that's what they're doing. So there might be, let's say there's 200 people fishing on a Saturday, on any one Saturday, 300 people fishing. All 300 people might be sitting over there in East Bay by Hannah's Reef.
because they heard that the fish are there.
So people come back in and they say, my God, there's people everywhere out there. And we're saying, well,
Not anybody over here.
I just drove around in my truck. I drove by the boat ramp under the Dickinson Bayou Bridge. I drove to the boat ramp underneath the Kemah Bridge. And I went by a couple of the other marinas. And there's hardly anyone out there. But everyone is packed in certain spots, if you will. And so there's this perception that from some people, there's this perception that there's a lot of boats out there.
So I'm going to get into a couple of things that people are commenting on. One of them, Sammy says, anyone who cares about our bay system will be for it. Recruitment is up, but the average size of the fish is down. What's your response to that?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Good question.
Yeah. In other words, there's been a move toward catching trophy trout, and of course, in my mind, when we first started lowering the limit, to me this was all a move toward trophy trout by a smaller group, and respectful of our caller. What we're really most interested in is what would be the best for the average person who buys a fishing license, but not the minority of people who just really would like to see regulations that would favor, catching larger and larger speckled trout. And on that same line, the regulations are always confusing to me because we have bag limits now that will entice a fisherman, in fact, force a fisherman to set out there and catch school trout in 13 to 15, maybe even 16 inches. And because of the size limit, they're out there catching and releasing small fish. And in the summertime, probably an unusual number of those released are going to be dying.
A high number.
They're called spotted weak fish. These are not bass, and these are not redfish. They really don't do well when they're caught and released, at least by the average fisherman. A lot of our fishermen would look for regulations from their own mind's eye. And so this is what I do, and this is what I want everyone else to do. And that's a huge mistake, because they're the same people that drive on the freeway every day, that cut you off, don't signal, actually pull in front of the 18-wheelers. These are the same people that buy a license and go out and fish. And so thinking that we are going to regulate Galveston Bay into trophy trout, and that's what we should be doing, is wrong. You're taking away fish from people to satisfy a small group that fish a lot and would like to see the fishery a certain way. And my position is that's not your right. It should be the job of the Parks and Wildlife to regulate this fishery for the public and for the best use of the resource that we have. And this is where we disagree. We shouldn't be building it for trophy trout. It should basically be for the general public, not guides or trophy trout fishermen.
And you said Sammy?
That was Sammy.
Yeah, and then Sammy, my response to that is this. In, let's see, it was 1991, I believe it was, Dad. The disputably, but hard to dispute, the best bait to catch fish would be a live shrimp. So I was fishing a lot that summer, and I went out with a friend of mine. We went out 2 days in a row, and those 2 days in a row we got 20 trout, and each day we caught roughly 120 to 150 trout. So I was fishing a lot that summer, and so I thought I was doing real well, and we were catching a lot of fish. And I came back to the dock the second day in a row, and I was telling my dad, "Man, we caught 130 trout." And my dad, this is my dad, Johnny Valentino, he pulled me to the side sternly, and he said, "Son, don't ever do that again in front of me." And I said, "What?" I mean, I'm pumped. We just caught a bunch of fish. We caught like 130 trout. We got 2 limits. Second day in a row. I was excited. And he said, "You just probably killed 80 trout." And I said, I never thought of that. And so, Sammy, one of the things that I believe after further evaluation, and I was at that time I was about 19 years old, and I just started thinking about growing up on the shrimp boat, some of the studies we had done with trout and redfish and their survivability. And so, my friend and I, Ryan, and I had hooked these trout. We brought them to the boat. In some cases, we netted them thinking that they would be 15 inches. They weren't. We then took the hook out, removed the hook, and threw the trout back in the water. And that trout was dead. Now, he swam off, but that trout was dead. That trout died. And so that was when my dad encouraged me that day, when he sternly pulled me to the side. And so you're saying, why would we be against conservation when actually it's the opposite? My dad sternly pulled me to the side. It was something I'll never forget. He was pissed. And my dad is for conservation. And he changed me that day. He said, "I think you should go with David Dillman. I'm going to talk to Captain David."
Don't throw me under the bus.
Dude, I'm being serious. Quit joking around. He said, "You need to go with Captain David Dillman, and you need to learn how to fish with live croakers. And instead of going out there with shrimp, during these hot July days, you go out there with croakers where you're going to catch maybe 10 trout, but these 10 trout are going to be keepers. That's the regulation the Texas Parks and Wildlife set up. We didn't set up these regulations. I actually think it should be the first 10 trout you catch. That's what I think it should be personally. I don't think it should be a 15-inch minimum, but I didn't set the regulation. So to catch 10 trout that I can legally keep, that's when I turned and switched. David took me out. We went with croakers and we caught 20 nice trout that we could keep. We did not even catch a small trout that we had to throw back.
He wants to know, he commented again, he said he wants us to answer the second part. Is there any size difference in the trout from now and 7 years ago?
Well, that's a
Man,
good one.
that's like a.
Let's go back to the 1950s.
Well, let's go first.
No,
let's
no.
whoa.
Let's go
Okay.
back to a theory that was agreed upon by all the experts in the 1950s, and that was some of the most famous fishermen of that day. They published this report about the fact that he had been fishing Galveston Bay in the past. Mostly what he caught were small school trout, but he made a trip, and they had caught a lot of 6 and 7 and 8 pound trout, and the conversation was with the commissioner of the Fish and Game Commission during that time, and the owner here at Eagle Point was Ray Jelinek. They had this little article in which there was an extensive one, and they tried to explain away how did all of a sudden Galveston Bay start producing these bigger fish. They quickly deduced that because of previous freezes, that a huge population of the trout in Galveston Bay were killed. Therefore, the total overall population of speckled trout was down, and the bigger trout, and of course pressure was really down, and the bigger trout survived, and for about 3 or 4 years there were huge lunker trout being caught in Galveston Bay. And here at Eagle Point there were reports all during those years following that freeze after a certain number of years. It's kind of like the deer theory. If you have a certain number of deer on a piece of property, and you're letting all the deer that can live there grow, then you have the Texas dog deer, what we all look at, these little old bitty tiny deer. But you don't have big deer unless you manage, and that means reducing the population of what? The smaller deer. The state has this policy right now where they don't want you to catch any of the smaller trout. They want you to catch the medium to big trout. So if there's an issue out there for our trophy guys, our big trout guys, that we say, hey, we understand your concern. The 15-inch rule is doesn't make sense. The smaller trout actually represent the largest part of the trout resource. When you tell the average angler that he can't keep any of those, but he can keep 5 or 10 or however many you want to pick out, doesn't really matter. Because with catch and release, you can catch and kill as many as you want. They only tell you can only bring to the dock 5. But you can kill as many as you feel like. That's legal. Just keep throwing them back. And so with the 15-inch limit, people can catch and kill as many of these small fish as they want. And the state is trying to force people into catching the middle-sized trout. And these are the bigger trout that some of the guys who are looking for a big trout, this is the fish the state's making these average guys keep fishing until they find them. To me, the answer is right there. The slot limit is all wrong. And so that's my story. And
Well, my story, I just want to say that here we go back again to regulations. 2003, they go 1 over 25 inches. Well, they put that into effect. The trout are going to get bigger. Man, guess it didn't work. If you're not catching them. There's another regulation that does not work.
It didn't seem
So
to produce that many more big fish.
That's
did
it.
Now, when was it they were catching all the 8-pounders? Was that 2 years ago or 3 years ago? When the guys were catching those big old 8-pounders.
Coming back south?
Yeah.
That was 2 years ago during the Star Tournament? Right?
Yeah.
I have no idea what you guys are talking about.
It's down where, golly, we know I can't.
Our customer, well, I thought
Yeah.
he was at the top of the star.
You mean he caught
leaderboard.
a 10-pounder?
Right, the 10s back at the floodgate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Might as well burn it to the ground.
So we've had some big trout being caught, but you know the average angler that we see at our place, he
Yeah.
doesn't even fish for big trout.
Well,
There's
but-
a few that do, and I see pictures. They come in here, they
But
show me
Sam-
pictures of good trout.
That was Sammy, yes.
Yeah, but Sam, I think what Sam might be asking is, have we seen
A decrease.
a decrease in the size of the trout caught over the last 50 years? Have you, Dad? You've been here since 1965. Are the stringers that people bring in, are the stringers the size of the fish, the average size? Are they bigger? Are they smaller? Or you don't see a difference?
It's up and down. That's the whole nature of this resource, because you're going to have all these climatic changes that alter the resource. We're going to have years where there are a lot more trout and there's a lot less trout, and when we say that we're going to protect these trout by cutting down on the regulations, and they're going to be now immune to changes, well that's not actually freeze. We're going to lose a big part of the resource, and we're going to suffer through some lean years, and I don't care what your limits are. And so the state is saying to us that they can have a big impact by lowering your daily catch, and I'm saying that's ridiculous on the very face of it, because a freeze does not discriminate, and only a certain number of trout are going to escape the effects from a freeze. Having more of them, if there's a theory that more will escape, I'd like to see that proven somewhere. I don't think that happens. I think after a freeze, you've got big destruction.
Sammy had to go. He said that, a couple of years ago, you could go out and catch a 6 to 7 pound trout quite often. And he said, just look at the Star Tournament each year. Upper Coast can't fill the board. And then Mark Keller said it was 10 years ago that Dwayne Lowry caught a big fish. But something that's pretty interesting with what
I do have a
people are
response
saying-
to that. Hold on.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, most big fish are never caught. It's not a trick answer, but it sounds like one. Most big trout are never caught. I mean, just this year, throughout the summer, I had a huge
Monster.
trout, and he came off at the boat. I heard this tons of times. Most big trout aren't caught. I mean, when you get in the conversation of big trout and how many are caught and how many are landed, the biggest trout I've heard of here is Ricky Woods. Ricky Woods. He said it was 11, 12 pound trout at the floodgate. It was in the net, out of the net, in the net, out of the net.
But it was never caught.
And then in the net broke, fish came off. He was by himself. So the big trout thing, like I'm talking about, like the trophy trout, the biggest trout ever caught, a Galveston Bay record. Why is there not one caught this year versus another? That can be very misleading. Very misleading.
And our trout are different than the lower coast. So when you're looking at big trout in Galveston Bay, you're not looking at huge trout anyway. 7, 8 year old mama trout is going to be 8 pounds or whatever. It's just not like the lower coast where you're going to have a much higher percentage, and where if somebody wants a trophy trout, that's where you should be looking. Galveston Bay, you're probably never ever going to approach a state record here, and that's just the fact of the type of fish that we have here. It's a resilient bay. We need help, and we're going to cover that hopefully in a little bit, as far as where our efforts should be if we want more speckled trout, and it's not in regulation.
There you go.
Now, honey, one of the things I wanted to cover was going back to the survey they sent out. What I find very disingenuous to the fishing anglers that are the people that go down to the boat ramp, they go down to the marinas, and they're the regular angler. It's just startling to me that they would send out 358 of these surveys to professional fishing guides, when they're saying that the regular angler, there's roughly 1 million regular anglers, recreational fishing license holders, saltwater fishing license holders, there's roughly 1 million. And they only sent out to those 1 million people, they only sent out 2,342 surveys. 1 million people would generate $35 million to the state of Texas, and they only sent out 2,342 surveys to the general public. The regular guy, the regular woman, the regular angler that we service, that we talk to, they only sent out 2,342 surveys. That's ridiculous. On top of that, the 358 surveys they sent out to guides, these are professional guides that they're running a business. They only spend $210 a year to run a business, and they got a ridiculous amount more in percentage of surveys sent to them. I find that very misleading. And so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation, is so at least the anglers, the regular angler, at least knows what's going on, and they can make their voice heard about this subject.
Well, it's interesting you say that. I wanted to get to this. So I will say there are a lot of people on here who are saying, why does a man need more than 5 trout per day? So that's the first part.
Well, that's a simple answer.
Go ahead.
They don't need more than 5 trout a day. The average person who's, I guess the average male is probably 190 pounds, he only needs 1 fish a day. I mean,
So-
but they don't go fishing once a day. So the person that goes fishing that we talk to, they go fishing with, let's pick a number. The average boat's $35,000. The average boat's $40,000. The conditions finally are right. Well, they think they're going to be right. They come down, they go fishing on Galveston Bay. They go out, they don't catch any fish. They go out a second time, they don't catch any fish. They go out a fourth time, they don't catch, third time, fourth time, they don't catch. They go out maybe the 10th time and the conditions are perfect. They accidentally set the anchor over on a school of trout, and now they can keep 5. But prior to 1978, they could keep, is it 1978, David?
Prior to 1978.
Prior to 1978,
They could
it was unlimited. In 1978, it was 20. 1984, it was 10. 1990, it was 10, and they got to be 15 inches. 2003, they can keep 10, 15 inches, but 1 over 25. And now you're saying to that person who's put all this effort in to get a boat, store a boat, pay for all the stuff that goes with the boat, the tackle, the rods, the reels, convincing their spouse that this is what we want to do for fun. And the one time they get lucky, they can only keep 10 trout to put in their freezer. Excuse me, they could only keep 5. That's ridiculous.
Yeah,
So-
I think to finish that answer, Rebecca, I think the question is actually, why would a person keep more than 5? Because if that person is questioning, well, I'm confused by the question. The question I would have for that person is, do you mean to tell me you are going fishing and you only intend to hook and catch 5 fish and then you're going home? That would be my question to whoever called in with that question.
Because it's a lot of work to put your boat on a trailer and drive all the way
There's
down
all
there.
kinds of fishing. We're talking about people, hopefully in the future, where families will load up their children and go to a pier somewhere, or the surf, or a pass, any place that they can pursue the activity, because it's not a sport. It's really a recreational activity, and that's what we want to keep it as. If you were to ask me, it's not a sport. Catching even a big trout is fairly low on the scale of things that we would call trophy hunting. And when we look back at a study that was done by Texas A&M back in 1989, and this was a very, very comprehensive study. They sent out over 10,000 surveys on this one. On the list of reasons why people go fishing, one of the questions was for the fun of catching fish. And in that questionnaire, 94.6 people responded for the fun of catching fish, either moderately or extremely so. That was their reason for fishing.
So nearly
For the-
95% of people who responded.
For the fun of catching fish. So that when you say, why does a man need more than 5 fish? I'm just asking you. You mean when you fish, you catch 5 and you go home? I don't think so. I think that when people go fishing, they continue to fish. They may release smaller fish. They may change and look for a different species of fish. But they don't stop at 5. So I think what the question means is, will the people who are taking their fish home to eat, should they be allowed to take home more than 5? If you catch and release speckled trout, I routinely call that catching and killing. And when people have walked into my place and told me, hey, yeah, we must have caught 100 trout, I've had a lot of people tell me that. We must have caught 100 today. Really? Yeah, but we don't keep them. And my response is, really? So you consider that sport? You hooked 100 trout and you released them? You didn't even keep one? In other words, I don't know how many you killed, but I can tell you killed quite a few. And I really don't want to hear that story. I just assume you just not ever talk to me again, because you killed a lot of fish. And I don't really understand that. I never have really understood that. So I'm from the other side. If you're going to catch a great eating fish like a speckled trout, it should be for consumption, or if you're going to do it in a sporting way, a catch and release, then that's great too. But there's a way to do that and do it safely. And the average guy doesn't know how to do that, do they, David?
Nope.
How would you catch and release trout safely, David?
Number one, try not to ever pull them out of the water if at all possible.
Don't touch them.
Don't touch them. Long pliers.
What about, do you touch them with the net?
I try not to touch them at all.
Or you can
Touch them with a wet towel if at all possible, if you have to do it. But there's not, there's not any real surefire way, I don't think there is, to catch and release them. So they say, oh yeah, we caught, I've talked to people that go, yeah, we wade fished the shoreline and we caught 6 and 7 pounders with the topwater, and topwater lures have 3 sets of treble hooks, and these fish are mauled. And then you sit there and have to touch the fish, rip those hooks out. Yeah, he may swim off, but there's no telling if the survival rate's there.
This is not like freshwater fishing.
No, it's not, and it's not like catch and release of redfish. Yes, redfish are hardy. You can pretty much catch and release a redfish, and if the hook's buried deep, just cut the line and let them go. But trout is a whole different subject. They're tender. They're not a real hardy fish, especially in the summer and in the heat to catch and release.
Well,
So if you want to keep 5, great. Keep your 5 fish and go. And then leave them alone.
and
But
don't
then
kill too
stop
many.
fishing.
Don't kill too many.
Well,
Stop
go
fishing.
find something else to catch.
Well,
Right.
to
They'll find
reiterate,
something
we're
else to
not
catch.
against catch and release. That's not what we're saying.
Right.
And that's not what I'm saying. If you're a catch and release fisherman and you don't even like to eat fish, my father, who was a shrimp fisherman, didn't like fish. He would go to Long John Silver's and eat that, and it had no taste. That was always funny to me. But I personally love fish. And so if a guy is catching and releasing fish and he's doing it in a responsible manner, man, I think that's great.
For instance, when I fish with my dad, if we catch a couple of small trout, he
Pull an
literally
anchor.
makes us move. Period.
We're not going to sit there and
And he says, I will only stay under one condition: if we put our biggest hooks on and we cut the barbs off.
Correct.
That's it. Never touch the trout. Big hook, no barbs. And then also about the gentleman that asked the question about catching more than 1, more than 2, keeping more than 1 or 2 or 5. The thing that's interesting about the people that responded to the survey that the Texas Parks and Wildlife sent out is the people that responded, they are the ones that are fishing an average of 40 days or more a year. So for the people that can do that, that is awesome. That is what the state of Texas needs. That's what Galveston Bay needs. I love that. Do you love that?
Yeah.
That?
You utilize
Yes.
your boat.
That's
yeah.
awesome. You're fishing 40 days or more a year. That's fantastic. And you know what? For the person that's fishing 40 days or more a year, and they go out and they catch 5 trout, they keep 5 trout, that's great. And then they go out a second time and they catch a couple trout, they go out a fourth time. By the time they've gone out 40 times, they've got some very nice trout, ate some nice trout. That's fantastic.
Freezer's full.
The freezer's full. But that is not even close to what we see as being the regular angler. The 1 million anglers in the state of Texas. That's not even closely representative of 1 million anglers. The majority of the anglers, in our opinion, and what we're trying to bring to the forefront of this discussion, is they don't go 40 times. They don't even go 20 times.
They don't go 10.
They go out and they want the dream, the possibility that I can go out there in one day, put some fish in my freezer. And they will eat on those fish for half the year. If they go out there 10 times, they might one time catch trout. I don't know if that, am I bringing that message
right.
clear?
Yeah, you're right. And then there's always the mystique about those anglers that, look, hey, look, they said that, the surveys at the boat ramps, they said that the average person, what they say, catch 3 trout a day?
No, the average person catches less than 5 trout.
Less than 5 trout a trip.
Including guides.
Including guides. So, you lower the limit, let's say...
So what's the point to a limit?
Well, you lower the limit to 5. That same person that may only catch 1 or 2 fish every time he goes out, you lower that limit to 5, you know what? That same person is going to catch 2 fish. Just because you lowered the limit to 5 is not going to be miraculously that he's going to catch 5 trout.
So what you're saying is the changing of the limit has little to no effect, or will have little to no effect.
Correct. It hasn't throughout the years. They're doing it again.
Guys, I think there are a couple of comments, actually a lot of comments on here that I think we should address. And one of them is, and I'm going to actually read what Carrie wrote. Of course, my spot just moved. Basically, he's saying, who needs more than 5 fish a day anyway? And he's basically saying, isn't this really just all the guides who are coming up with this new rule? Who want this? Who are voting for this?
Carrie, I don't
Let's
mean
see
to
if I
be...
can find the exact comment for you. Because we have so many comments that it's getting a little confusing. Go ahead, Eric,
Well,
while I'm looking.
I don't mean to be repetitive to the other listeners, but Carrie, nobody needs more than 1 trout a day. If I go home tonight and I have 1 trout to eat or 1 fish to eat, that's all I need. But people, that's not how it works in fishing. People buy this boat, they buy this motor, they get the storage for the boat, they get all the tackle, all the crap, and they get a chance to go out, and they go out maybe 5 to 10 times a year. That's what the average person's doing. The average person's fishing 5 to 10 times a year. I do not have a survey that tells me that. I'm going by what I see here at the marina. People go out 5 to 10 times a year. They go out, Carrie, and they don't catch any fish. They go out a second time, no fish. Third time, fourth time, fifth time, no fish. So maybe on that 8th trip out of 10 trips, they go out and Carrie, nobody that fishes 10 times a year is any good. Nobody. So they go out, it's a dream. This is a hobby. This is not a sport to them. This is not sport. This is not a measurement of somebody's athletic ability. This is, I want to take my friends, my family, or I want to go out and have some stress relief. And that one time they go out and they're having fun, they luckily, by chance, put the anchor over on some fish. They then want to keep some fish and put them in their freezer. Just like when the shrimp boats go out and they start catching big shrimp, they may catch big shrimp for 1 week. What do? We keep the big shrimp and we freeze them to sell to our customers because that's all you're going to get for the year. They don't just go out there and catch big shrimp all season long. They may catch big shrimp for literally 1 week. That's it, honey.
Maybe 3 days.
Okay, so what Carrie actually says was kind of funny. Who really wants to clean that many fish after a long day on the water anyway?
That's what we've said.
And
That's what we said, Carrie.
And he addressed this to you, David. He says, come to think of it, maybe the guides are the ones sponsoring this change to 5.
So Look, I didn't get a survey, and I've been in the business a long, long time.
How long?
Over 30 years. So, and I did not get
Moby
a survey.
Dick.
Yeah, well, not quite. But anyway, there's people longer. So, there is I'm going to tell you, there's a push by a group of guides that think we need to lower the limit to 5.
We need to, or they just want you to?
They see a need for it. They say, oh, well, the trout's been hammered by this and that, by the drought and everything else. But the biggest problem we have, folks, it's not the fish. It's not the numbers of fish. It's the habitat in the water. If you don't have the habitat and you don't protect the water, I don't care what they put the limit at. You're not going to have any fish. Johnny, you could probably talk more about that than anything.
I could, but I want to back up just a little bit because we didn't quite finish the idea about if we go to 5 trout, what's going to be the reward. So in other words, we say nobody needs more than 5, and we're going around that, and that's just a matter of personal approach because
5 a day. Nobody needs more than 5 a day.
correct. It's the people that don't fish that often, and when they're finally out there and find fish, they should be able to catch a reasonable number. What's a reasonable number? It used to be unlimited, then it was 20, and then it was 10. Now we want to go to 5. All that I would request of the Parks and Wildlife is show us some results, because if you can't show the results, then what is the point? And when we went into a meeting in 2014 in Dickinson, they had already had the 5 trout limit down the coast. And in that meeting, they could not show us results from the 5 trout limit being implemented down there. They tried to show us results, but the results were so limited that pretty much the 140 people that were there didn't buy any of the story. In the end, their response was the reason the 5 trout limit wasn't working down the coast was upculling and non-observance of the law. In other words, I think that going from in Galveston Bay from 10 to 5, you will see huge non-observance of the law. That's going to be a problem for us. And second, you definitely will see upculling. You will see people on fish.
Yeah.
They will continually throw back smaller fish that would definitely be dead and upcall. And I want to read you something, if I have it still here, from Shannon Tompkins, the Houston Chronicle.
Who's Shannon Tompkins?
This guy wrote the article that
Yeah, so Shannon Tompkins wrote that article, and Shannon Tompkins wrote this article.
he wrote this in 1996.
Yeah, right
And it discusses about the only way anglers can be managed, their impact on the resource controlled, so that a fishery remains healthy is through regulations. But it's not as simple as just telling anglers what they can and can't keep or what gear they can use. For regulations to be effective, anglers have to follow them. And unless anglers at least grudgingly support the rules, and most abide by them, either because they see positive results or they fear enforcement. And if you don't believe that, they say, then the regulations are worthless. And if you don't believe that, look at how ineffective the 55 mile per hour speed limit was. Because some of you may remember they tried that 55. That didn't work. And he said this and wrote this in 1996. So what we're talking about is not only that we haven't been shown any great positive results from down the coast and all the way up to Matagorda by the state that would prove to us that this is another necessary takeaway from our rights to catch and keep fish. But that also there's the question that people are not going to abide by this law that well, so that we may not see effects from it in Galveston Bay as well as what they didn't see in the lower coast. Now, they may have seen improvement since that time, but I'd like to see that.
Well, what are the when you talk about going from no limit on trout to 20 per person, then to 10, and then let's say, for example, in lower coast to 5, what type of results should somebody expect?
Well, if you're talking about...
In other words, if you sell this bill of goods, and we talked about this, so, I mean, what would a reasonable person, reasonable angler expect?
Man, if they go to 5, I should be able to.
I mean, what should the results be now is what I'm saying. I mean, when they've sold the bill of goods of we can control the resource by a rod and reel limit, which I don't think has ever been displayed at all, what should they be able to display? And that's what we're wondering.
The numbers on their survey.
Should
in other words,
jump off the board.
Yeah, because if right now they're surveying people at the Eagle Point Ramp, which they do, and they have averages for what the average fisherman catches and all that, then from the end of year 1, those should be doubled. We just cut the regulation in half. That means that if they're averaging 1 fish per person per day, then the next year should be 2. And if you can't show that,
Next year should be 4, conceivably, correct?
conceivably with the spawning that you're referring to, we won't even hold that against them. We just say just double it because you're cutting the regulations in half. If you're not doubling it, then explain to us why you're not. And that's what they did in 2014. They're not because people just called up. They threw away the little ones. Then some people didn't even abide by the regulations. They were cheating. So our position is, gosh, why put us through all that? Why put our fishermen through that? Why take away more fish if we're not going to see results? And if we are, let's get more data out there. Let's go to these scope meetings, and that's in the end. I don't know if we're getting ready to wrap up or not, but before we wrap up,
Not yet. We got a few more things.
There are a couple things I do want to address. So first of all, Dean has made a lot of comments. He's strongly for 5 trout. Strongly for 5 trout.
Good,
It seems
good.
like he likes fishing,
okay.
but he says that study that we just read from the Chronicle was from 4 years ago, and he wants to make that point, and that's fine, Dean. And the one thing that he's saying,
He's saying what?
the article that Johnny just read from, is from 4 years ago. So, but his point is the limited reds with a slot. They limited the reds with a slot, and that's increased the size. And he's saying
It's increased.
going to 5 trout will put less stress on the Galveston Bay complex. And so I want to address that because he's got several comments on here. And then I want to address one more thing. You guys talk about that, and then I want to make sure we comment on one more thing. Go ahead.
Man,
Redfish. I mean,
redfish.
Yeah, yeah. The redfish is, a lot of what happened with the redfish was, the half tree. They let go millions and millions and millions and millions of redfish, and the redfish have been prolific, and they've just taken over. Number one reason is nobody wants to clean them. So you catch and release them.
Is there a connection between proliferation of our redfish and decline, or maybe a stabilization of the trout? I mean, what do redfish eat?
Anything they want.
Will they eat a small speckled trout?
Yes, they will.
Okay. So have we gone down that pathway, because it's been approached many times?
I've always figured that there's a fine line between what a man can do with Mother Nature, because Mother Nature can take care of itself. It has since Jesus was a baby. And I think when you start messing with the scales a little too much, you can tip them in the wrong direction.
Well, back to what he said. He said something about my dad reading an article from when?
It was the other article 4 years ago. I don't think that's a big a deal. He's just saying, like,
Yeah.
he's strongly
No,
that was from
he's
96.
strongly for getting this to 5.
Sunday, May the 5th, 1996.
Oh, it was more than 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So what
What else did Dean say?
But Dean's whole thing is the redfish versus the trout, and I think what we were saying before is the redfish is a whole different species. It's like really a tough fish, and so catching one of those and releasing it is very different.
You can hit a redfish over
catching
the
a
head,
speckled trout
over the
With
head
a
with a hammer.
sledgehammer, yeah.
That's a tough fish.
And so that's the difference between the two. And so
speckled trout is a
catching and
weak fish.
releasing trout is very different than catching and releasing if you've already hit your limit.
Yeah, and so one of the things to address with Dean, and really to anyone that's listening, is I don't think, to a certain extent, when you catch a trout, and let's say this trout is anywhere between 12 and say 17 inches, and you're not keeping this trout because the trout's too small, or you're not keeping the trout because you arbitrarily are culling, and so you bring the trout to the boat, and you think, well, man, maybe I'll net this trout and measure it, and then you measure it, and then the trout flops on the boat, and then you go to remove the hook, and then you throw the trout back. Is that a wasted fish? Is that a wasted trout? Well, maybe not, because the basically it's bycatch. The trout swims around for maybe a day or 2 or 5, and the trout dies, and then something else eats it. So the trout's consumed, and that's okay. My thing is that the trout is a fish that people like to eat. They like to eat the trout because it fillets good, it fillets easy. You don't have to go out of your way one way or another to keep the trout in a condition that's easy to clean. It's got good skin on it.
Easy to freeze.
And it's a waste of a fish that people like to consume for many reasons. When we're here at the marina, there are so many people, and you said it was Dean? Dean, people do not like to clean redfish, period. So, especially today. So there is just a difference between an angler from the 70s and 80s that would, with no problem, they would clean a drum, a sheephead, a redfish, a gaff top, a whiting. They had no problem cleaning them. They loved to clean fish, and there was no complaining. But with all due respect to you, we're talking to these customers cleaning these fish. We like to go down, talk to them, get pictures. They do not want to clean a redfish. They release them. And so the redfish thing is a whole different ballgame. People love to clean trout.
Timothy commented really quickly, well, if we're saying that this is possibly killing the trout, why aren't they floating all over the bay system?
Well, things don't float in the bay system. They get that. I just covered that. They get consumed. If you just throw something in the water out here, it'll be eaten in less than 1 second.
Yeah, 2 seconds.
And they don't die right away. What will kill a fish that's been damaged? In other words, slime coat being removed, especially if he's scratched. It's going to be a little slower death. They're going to be attacked by the bacteria that are prevalent in Galveston Bay, and during the summer especially, the bacteria levels are up. So when you catch and release a speckled trout starting in the warm weather months, then the mortality is going to rise. And I think most fishermen would agree with me if you've fished that many times, and you may see it swim away. But just because it swam away, again, this is not a bass and it's not a redfish. He's scratched, he's injured, slime coat's been removed. The average angler, and this is what we're talking about, and try to separate out. Some of our callers are experienced anglers, and they know what they would like to see, and they know what they do, and we're not knocking any of those people. What we're talking about is what we see from the general public. And the general public is going to take a fairly small trout and flip him in the boat even, and let him fall on the deck.
And grab him with this death
Once
squeeze.
you've done that and you've done that damage and removed that much of his slime coat to put that trout back in the water in the summer, the odds of him staying alive over a period of days is greatly diminished. And you can check with the Parks and Wildlife on the different types of little bacterial infections that they will develop.
Yep.
So you can see them swim around, and they may live for a longer period of time, but their odds of survival it's really limited once they've been handled.
So an example of that is my uncle has a fish farm, and when if you wouldn't mind, Dad, helping me with the explanation, but when they get you call it the brood stock.
Mm-hmm.
Brood stock, huh?
The big ones.
Yeah, when you get the brood stock for the redfish farm, when they go out and catch these redfish, now we're talking about, again, redfish, not trout. When they go out and get that redfish, they only will fish with a certain type of single hook, a big one, so they ensure that they hook the big red in the lip. And then he was explaining when they bring him to the boat, then they will try to land him on a scoop. What do you call it, David? Like a pad, if you will. They will not net the fish. Of course, they're not going to gaff the fish or anything like that. They're not going to try to jerk the fish in, anything. They will try to bring them up on like a bed. and they will try to not even touch the redfish. And again, redfish. They then transport the fish back to the farm, and then in a couple of cases when they just did this recently, they didn't even touch the redfish, but they noticed a problem with the scales on one of the redfish, and they ran this redfish through it in a tank where they cycled through a particular bacteria fighting liquid, and they did this for about 48 hours to try to keep the redfish alive.
Okay, I've got one more question that I want to address on here, and I think this is important for us to talk about. Jason Bartlett also commented several times. He is for 5 fish limit.
Hey, Jason.
And he said, I've got a question for y'all. Are y'all, Eagle Point, against lowering the limit of speckled trout in Galveston Bay because of the money y'all are going to lose on croaker sales? And I think we should talk about that, because
Good question.
if that's what he thinks and if that's here, we need to address that.
Good question.
So.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, you know, when I guess we started using croakers the first time as bait, the use of the croaker, I guess, as a bait was greatly enhanced because of the lack of shrimp. Basically, the Parks and Wildlife had changed a lot of the shrimping laws during that particular point in time, and all the bait shops were looking for alternatives to just live shrimp. And so croakers were developed actually over quite a period of time. It took us about 3 years to finally figure out how we could actually catch croakers and keep them alive on the boat, and then also keep them alive at the dock. And of course, all those secrets were finally released. So now our croaker sales are actually minor. A lot of bait shops sell croakers, so it's not like a big item to us like it was there for a few years. We're not going to be losing a lot of money no matter which way this regulation goes. And to be honest, we've been in business a long, long time, and we're more concerned about the average angler who drives to Eagle Point, and Eagle Point is still open to the public. We have a few guides that work out of here, so we're not like a business that's run by professional fishermen. You will find a lot of the fishermen that fish here, of course, are very experienced anglers. If they stay around here long enough, this is the oldest fishing facility in the state of Texas. Officially, it was opened in 1929, but there were fishing efforts from Eagle Point in 1837, so this is nothing new to us folks who've been here a long time, and we think that we know this bay probably better than most people. Our attempt today is to inform the public. People that will respond and think that we're just against the 5 trout, no. We think that the public should know that there is this effort to reduce it to 5, and what we would like to see is from the Parks and Wildlife is some sort of reason why. Not just because a small group of people, of whom you may be part, and we don't mean this to be insulting, but if you're part of a small group of people that fishes more than 40 times a year as a private individual, or if you're a professional guide, look, your opinion counts, but it shouldn't count to the degree that the survey would indicate, and that the average fisherman who fishes a few times a year, as Eric was talking about, is the person that we should be building our regulations off of. So the fact that some folks would like to see different regulations to suit themselves, nothing wrong with that. It's just that these surveys should actually represent the people of the state, and that's the people we do business with. The person off the street, he drives down here, he's just a regular Joe. He may buy bait from us, he may buy nothing from us. He may just pay for a ramp fee and get protected launching in Galveston Bay and a safe place to park. Very limited amount of money. So, no, money's not our object today to discuss this issue, and we're glad that you sent in a comment.
Yeah, and then my response, Jason, is we actually do not run this business in this property, which I work for my dad, I work with my dad, and we are not doing with this property what would be most profitable. So that's not a big deal for you or me, but when you bring up money, I do want to respond by saying we already don't do with this property what we could do to make the most money with it. And so that's been actually a topic of conversation in our household, the Valentino household, for 40 years. This is a lifestyle, and my dad has chosen to serve the public, to serve people of all kinds, people from different backgrounds, different races, different religions, different points of view. Of course, we treat everyone with respect, women, children, and this is an important thing for us, that everyone gets an opinion, everyone gets a vote, and we feel like that this is not what's being done. We feel like there's misinformation out there. And look, if there's any information that we presented to you, Jason, that might help you in altering your opinion, that's the point of this. We're not trying to change your opinion with one thing. We're just trying to bring new information to some people that, again, people are working out there. People are working 5, 6, sometimes 7 days a week. They don't have the ability to just do research on all this. We're trying to bring information to people about Galveston Bay and Galveston Bay fishing. And again, we believe there's a lot of misinformation. More people than ever on Galveston Bay. The bay is overloaded. There's all kinds of pressure. If you just use croakers, you're going to catch fish like crazy. All this stuff is just baloney. So, in the fact that you think potentially that if you just go out and use a croaker, you're going to catch fish, I have hundreds of customers that might reply, and if this applies to you, I hope you respond. If you just go use croakers, you're not going to just go out there and catch a limit of trout, because we have tons of customers that do use croakers and they don't go out and just catch a limit of trout.
And to make the point of what he's asking, selling croakers is not, or not selling croakers is not going to break our business.
No, because when we sell croakers, the profit margin is so small.
Yeah.
To run a bait shop and the amount of work that goes into running a bait shop, the profit margins are so slim. There's in fact, in the old days, my dad would just shut the bait shop down for 4 to 6 months out of the year, because this marina stayed in business with its commercial operations, not with the sport fishing operations. What we do with shrimp, croakers, the boat ramp, that's sport fishing. This marina has stayed in business for as long as it has with its commercial fishing operation. And now we're a 50-50, 50 commercial, 50 sport fishing. Obviously our RV park operations. We do a lot of different things, so we keep this business, we keep the business solvent, afloat.
Yeah.
We don't rely just on one thing.
But
Yeah,
that's not why we're having this discussion.
No.
We want to make that clear.
Yeah.
We're not putting all this work
Croakers,
in. We're not putting all this work in and having all this conversation about selling
To
croakers.
sell a
No,
croaker.
not to sell croakers. Believe us.
I guess in the finality we could say we could stop selling croakers tomorrow and we'd still be in business.
Selling shrimp's a lot easier than selling croakers.
But either way, we'd still be in business.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for asking.
I do want to bring up something.
I hate to tell you guys, but just right there,
There's birds
I
working.
wish you would see that. They've been working there for about 15, 20 minutes, a huge flock of birds.
Now-
I see it.
Now, honey,
Yes.
David and I
David and I.
knew that there was a group of people pushing this sort of thing, and so we decided to do our own survey.
We did.
And we have surveys right here, and we haven't been doing the surveys for that long, and we've had great response. And David did not do a survey. I did not do a survey. Nobody affiliated with Eagle Point did a survey. And right now, our surveys with our regular customers, the average
Fisherman.
angler, Right now, we're at 83.5% are for no change. 16.5% are for change. And so I've been sitting on these, and when I read that article, of course, I'm glad that we've done this survey.
Yeah.
So what do you want people to do? Let's have a call to action here. There are a couple of things that people could do regarding their feelings on the limit, and let's go through those. Eric.
Well, the biggest thing that I see on the Bay is that we're always concerned with the Bay. When somebody says, "Are we concerned with the trout regulations or the redfish regulations? Are we concerned with these things?" For, let's say, for example, the easy thing for somebody to say would be, "Well, you're concerned with that for your business." But a bigger picture thing is what we're concerned about more so for all of Galveston Bay and our businesses. We're concerned about the health of the Bay and what can be done about the actual water. And so we've talked about this before. I'm not going to go
Yeah,
on about it.
that's a whole nother show.
But we've talked about this in previous shows where my dad's going to touch on this a little bit. We've got this giant Houston ship channel that they continue to expand, they continue to deepen, they continue to widen, and the inflow of all this salt water that is changing the salinity of the bay. It's changing the way the tide flows and its velocity. So you have a tremendous tide that's rushing in and rushing out. And then the starving Galveston Bay, the freshwater runoff from the natural runoff. You're starving the bay from fresh water from the San Jacinto, the Trinity, and the likes. So you have a bay that's changed dramatically from the 70s, 80s, and I'd really say from the 70s and 80s. Going into the late 90s, this was already going into major effect. So the bay has a problem with its salinity, and then you have a pollution problem. And we know that they're not going to get rid of the Houston Ship Channel. You know they're not going to get rid of the Houston Ship
Nah,
Channel.
that's always.
But the pollution is something that's just ridiculous. And there was an article that my dad's boat captain was in, and this was on September 30th. And I know y'all can't see that, but here's the article. And they were talking about a ammonia plant that they're trying to build in Texas City. And this is just another example of ridiculous pollution that would harm Galveston Bay. And as we know, these plants are all over. And this is stuff that they want anglers to attack each other about. Well, you fished with a rod and reel and you fished too long and you caught too many fish and you did this and you did that. To me, this is where our focus needs to be.
Correct.
Anglers don't need to be arguing and fighting over what kind of bait you use and how you fish and how many fish you caught. This is the future of Galveston Bay. Pollution, salinity, and things of that nature. And so if you start paying attention to these things, I think, and we're talking about a tremendous situation. These are battles that will be going on for the next 200 years. Dad?
Joining the Galveston Bay Foundation is a really good way to get invested. It's a nice group. I've been on some of the advisory boards there for the last 15 years or more, and participated in a number of different things. But for the average person who doesn't have any other way to contribute or any other way to kind of keep abreast of what's going on, joining the foundation is a really good idea. Giving them a small donation to be a member, and then they will certainly keep emails and literature coming your way on what they're doing. It's one of the few organizations, in fact, the only one that I know that is actively building and rebuilding our marshes and marshlands. They do work with industry as they have to. I think there's many more things that could be done through the foundation and through other organizations like the foundation. Of course, none of them are as powerful as that one. And that's the easiest way, I think, to participate in trying to help Galveston Bay. The other thing is paying attention to these articles when there's another permit application. There's a big choice on how we're going to build something like an Ike Dike or something to protect ourselves against hurricane intrusion. That is a huge one for Galveston Bay. Every angler out there should be paying close attention to what they eventually decide that they want to build. Now, if you're in your 70s and you don't think you'll live long enough to see it, maybe you can back away. But if you're younger and you're really interested, or if you want to do something for your grandchildren, you should stay on top of the Ike Dike and then some of the construction ideas that people have had on hurricane reduction efforts. Very, very big item, and it doesn't get the coverage that it should. And I get all kinds of literature on it, and I certainly have my viewpoint from going all the way back to the original dredging of the ship channel back in the 60s, and certainly some of the projects in the 70s. They've not listened to one word I have had to say, and I had some really good ideas because we grew up here. We knew exactly what was going to happen when they started widening and deepening this channel. So it behooves any of those folks who are watching to get involved in some of these things and educate yourself, on what's going on. We didn't even touch on the disaster of our oyster reefs out here and the complete misinformation that's being put out there by the agencies. I can't believe that they keep telling these stories the way they're telling it, and that should be something for another show.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So
oyster reefs and how to rebuild them.
So, obviously, joining the Galveston Bay Foundation would be a good thing for people who are interested in the subject to do.
One.
That's number one. They can contact the Texas Parks and Wildlife and give their opinion. That's number two. Number three, scoping meetings.
Scope meetings will be coming up, and then we'll start passing out dates. So as soon as we get the information, we will post them on our Facebook page. We'll do
There'll be a
Facebook
there'll be a
Live.
scope meeting close to almost everyone. So
Yes, they'll have them throughout the area for the Upper Coast. They'll be in Sabine. I mean, they'll be scattered out throughout the Upper Coast, because this is not just going to affect Galveston. This will affect all the way over to the Sabine.
And then Eric mentioned paying attention to what's going on, like this ammonia plant. So pay attention to what's going on in our area and what could possibly affect Galveston Bay.
Well, yeah, like
Let's wrap it up.
Hurricane Harvey dumping all the millions of gallons of sewage into the bay, and all this just ridiculousness. I mean, just polluting the bay, not respecting the bay. They've got anglers trying to fight amongst themselves over catching fish with a rod and reel versus,
What's really important?
the pollution of this bay, the destroying of the bay with pollution in the water. It's just it's painful to watch.
I'll give a very pointed, I would say, example. I'm looking out the window across Galveston Bay, and I'm looking at a thing that they declared to be constructed for widening and deepening the Houston Ship Channel, and they call it the Mid-Bay Marsh.
Mid-Bay Marsh, New
The
Island.
Mid-Bay Marsh is 20 feet high. And I want to challenge any of our listeners and any of you folks who want bigger trout, that when you're gonna take hundreds and hundreds of acres away from our bay system, that were actually some of our very top trout producing areas.
Some people say the best.
Yeah, there was some great fishing along those areas. And you're going to remove that completely out of our system, and you're going to con the public to believing that you're going to be building this marshland, and then yet you don't. And these are the things that we watch every day. We know kind of how this thing happens. The problem is, we're just a small business, and I'm just one person. So when we discuss this, I'm just a bait camp operator, and what do I know? We just watch it happen. But with more people operating, and certainly the Galveston Bay Foundation should know about this, and these are the projects that people should be up on top of, and entering your opinions as a sport fisherman, because you certainly have a right to protect the environment in Galveston Bay. You have a right to speak out, even in the face of huge industry pushes. It's amazing what just a few thousand people can do if they decide they don't want something that's harmful to the bay system itself. So that's another thing to continue to watch, because when they're doing this ship channel, it's huge industry, and most people think they can't stop it.
Yeah, the quickest way that somebody loses their quart or 2 quarts or 4 quarts of bait is they put their bait in their bucket and they forgot that they had a drop of Clorox in there.
So, any last points before we wrap it up?
Well, we've got a lot more information to cover another time, and we just want to summarize by saying we wanted to bring this to the people's attention that did not read the paper, that don't know anything about what's going on. This, again, like I've said, a group of people that are pushing this, and we believe that there is some misinformation that's out there, and we want to make sure that you're all aware of it, and you're dotting your I's and you're crossing your T's, and you make sure you formulate your own opinion. And something just doesn't smell right to me. The whole idea that they sent out all these surveys to the guides and not to the public, the recreational fishing license holder. It just, what is it? Sounds like a duck, walks like a duck. It's a duck. Something just doesn't. Something doesn't.
I think it's kind of like that. I don't know.
I don't think that's it.
This just doesn't pass the smell test.
So I'll end up
You got anything
from the paper.
I can't.
23.2 opposed to change. 23.2 are neutral. In other words, don't change anything. 12.1 oppose the reduction, and 11% strongly oppose. So that's 70-something% of the people, approximately, that either want no change at all or they strongly oppose any reduction. And that does not jive with the headlines in the paper.
So y'all, let's real quick. Weather looks good for this weekend. We will at Eagle Point Fishing Camp have live bait, live shrimp supply, live croakers. So come on out here and enjoy the fishing. It's been good. Go catch your fish and enjoy the weather. And thanks for
Thanks for
listening
listening
to us for about 2 hours today. It's been a long show. Anyway, thanks for tuning in and hope to see you. Like us on Facebook. Keep watching the Galveston Bay Fishing Show live from Eagle Point Fishing Camp in sunny San Leon, Texas for a change.
Have a great rest of the week and a great weekend.